we're going to do this chapter ninja style. And we're back in normal mode. Chapter number 13 that we will be looking at shortly. Exercise prescription for muscular fitness. So going through some basic principles, some of them we've already talked about in the past for exercise physiology, maybe strength and fitness programming, maybe a little touch of biomechanics in there as well. But some principles of training, some common terms used in muscular fitness training and strength training mostly. And then towards the end, we start to get into some maybe special populations, those being children, seniors, as well as pregnant individuals or pregnant women. So enjoy the chapter. If you have any questions, please let me know, and I will see you at the end of the chapter. Okay, chapter 13, exercise prescription for muscular fitness. Let's get into this bad boy. All right, let's look at the roles of resistance training. So some of the traditional aspects of it are enhanced sport performance or some type of physical performance, and also from that, an increase in muscle size. And that increase in muscle size is very important for sport performance, for power and strength capabilities. But we do know now that it's also very important for trying to reduce the amount of injuries. And that tends to be some of the main goals for that. And also currently, we have an enhancement of health and fitness parameters in people who were previously not trained at all. Some of those aspects would be like glucose metabolism is much better. It's more efficient. You have an increase in insulin sensitivity from any type of physical activity. And then also the management of body composition. They're going to be increasing their fat-free mass and decreasing their fat mass at the same time. They're boosting their metabolism. So there's a reduced risk of hypertension as well as a reduced risk of developing what's known as metabolic syndrome. And that metabolic syndrome has a bunch of different factors in it. One of them being waist circumference, insulin sensitivity, glucose levels, actually, as well as cholesterol levels. So there's a few different aspects. We're not going to go into that too much in detail, at least as of yet for that. But just know that metabolic syndrome does exist, and there are different parameters for it and different numbers and different values for those parameters. All right, the principles of training, the pros. So we have this progression that needs to happen. So you're trying to manipulate program variables to try to continually increase the stimulus over time. And the reason for this is eventually you're probably going to, whoever is training is going to reach a plateau. If they do the same thing day after day after day for weeks, for months, for even years. And there needs to be a progressive overload that needs to happen for a training stimulus to take place above and beyond that plateau. If you do the same amount of sets, the same amount of reps, the same weight every single day, the same exercises, actually doing the same exercises could actually break down the muscles. It's not giving them time to heal. But there needs to be an increase in the stimulus. There needs to be an increase in the amount of weight that is lifted, increase in the reps, or maybe decrease in the reps and increase in weight. So there needs to be a training stimulus. And also maybe even the different types of exercises need to change as well. So instead of doing dumbbells or barbells, switch it up, do vice versa. Normally an exercise that you would perform on a barbell, such as the bench press, maybe you want to do dumbbell bench press or something like that, or maybe an incline press. Maybe an exercise that is performed with a set of dumbbells, such as curls. Maybe try the barbells instead. So something different, and maybe even decreasing the weight, increasing the reps, or vice versa. There also needs to be a regularity to this training. It can't just be once a week for, however often, or it can't be random and take these big long breaks, 2, 3, 4 weeks. It needs to be on a regular basis for any of these adaptations to occur, at least properly. And these training adaptations, no matter what the training is, whether it is resistance training or if it is any type of aerobic training, they're not going to last if you're not actually training the body. If someone just stops training, they're going to lose those adaptations. It costs energy to maintain some of those adaptations, and it costs energy to maintain muscle mass. So if you're not training the body, and if you're not feeding it the right foods, then that individual is going to end up losing some of those adaptations. So going back to that overload, the exercise at a level beyond which is normally stressed. So again, the body is trying to adjust to the new stress that you're placing upon it. And what you are adjusting to change that adaptation is intensity, the total reps, maybe even the speed of the repetitions, the rest periods between sets, or maybe even if you're doing something like supersets or maybe trisets, having smaller breaks in between the different exercises. And also the overall training volume is increased as well. All right, specificity, or the SAID principle, or specific adaptation to imposed demands. So this is most of the effective programs target specific muscle groups and energy systems that are designed for the end goal. Meaning that, for example, and this is somewhat of an obvious one, but this is, I guess, a little bit more lines of aerobic versus anaerobic training, just the pure aspects of not taking into account the weight training aspect of it. But if a football player was wanting to get into football shape, if you look at the sport of football, most plays last a few seconds. I don't know, maybe up to 10 or 12 seconds at most. So even though that aerobic training can help, especially for overall health, it's not the goal. The goal is more of an anaerobic type of power that needs to be adapted. So if someone wants to gain muscle mass in their chest or their upper body, they're going to be performing upper body exercises. And there's different specific exercises that one could perform to actually induce an adaptation in certain muscle groups. Obviously, you can look through any textbook on weight training, and it'll point out the different muscle groups that will be hit by each of the exercises that can be performed. All right, so some program design considerations. So the health status of the individual. This is really, really important. Including any of the previous training experience that they have had. And that's important because if they don't know exactly what they're doing, they've never experienced it themselves. They may have seen someone on TV or seen someone on Instagram or wherever it was. They have not experienced it themselves, and they have not actually done it themselves. So they may not actually be able to do it, especially when you get into more of the Olympic type of lifts, like a power clean or a snatch or something like that. It's going to be very difficult for them to just get in there and do it right away. So there needs to be a learning curve there. Also, if they have any injuries, any known diseases, and also what are their personal goals? What are they trying to achieve? Are they just trying to increase muscle mass? Are they just trying to find something to do in their spare time? And also at the same time, increase their health, or maybe decrease some of the risks for developing certain diseases. Also looking at fitness level as well as age. Fitness level is important because if somebody is fit, more than likely they've been performing some of the exercises, they're experienced in it. And if somebody is really fit, the more fit somebody is, the less they have to gain. So the closer they are to their peak. And as we age, that peak starts to decrease further and further. Especially right around age 25 to 30-ish. I've talked about it before, where there is going to be a slight decrease in metabolism year after year after year. So the adaptations are going to maybe start to decrease, but it's still a good thing that they are still working out as they get older and older as well. So other program design considerations, looking at the training goals. What are the short-term goals? What are they trying to achieve within the first few weeks or maybe first few months? And then long-term, are they training for something, or do they want to get down to a certain weight, or gain so much muscle mass, or have a certain amount of strength? Maybe their goal is, I want to be able to bench 300 pounds. I want to be able to squat 500 pounds. Maybe that's their goal. So using some evaluations prior to the training, as well as looking at the personal goals. So, and also keep in mind, establishing realistic goals is very, very important. If someone comes in there and they've never trained before, and say they're 40 years of age, and their goal is to bench press 450 pounds. It's been their goal since they were a little boy. Well, you probably need to start with the short-term goals and say, you know what? That long-term goal is very admirable, However, might not necessarily get there, but we'll try. But we'll set these realistic goals before we start looking down the road to that, and even looking at reevaluating that long-term goal and talking to the individual about it. Because if they have that goal, and that's a kind of an extreme example, but if somebody has a goal that is not necessarily realistic, especially in the short term, the long term, it just kind of depends upon their age or previous training, and also genetics plays a role. But it could discourage them if they're getting to a point where they start to plateau and they don't see themselves reaching that goal. So they could drop out, and the exercise adherence then starts to decrease. So test the fitness periodically, review the progress, see what's working, see what's not working, see what they like. All right, different types of resistance training, isometric or static resistance training. So the muscle length in this case does not change. We've seen this before with the isometric contractions and the isometric training. So there is tension within the muscle, but there is no lengthening or shortening of the muscle itself. So the myosin and actin are bound, or the cross bridges are there, but there is no movement of the muscle itself. So the strength and the size gains are somewhat limited to the joint angle of training. So they must be performed at multiple angles. And in that case, you might as well go ahead and perform the dynamic movement in that case. Now, the isometric exercises could be performed with somebody who has a limited mobility, especially if they're in a cast or in some type of brace that is limiting their movements. It can still help reduce the amount of atrophy that can occur. But there is a small gain. There could be minor gains in the actual strength of the muscles, but it's not going to be nearly as much as it is with the dynamic movement. So the eccentric and concentric contractions combined. There was a study back, I believe it was in the 70s, and I've mentioned it before, about isometric exercises actually increasing muscle mass and strength just as much, or I guess almost as much, as the dynamic types of exercises. However, nobody was able to repeat that study and repeat the results of that study. They repeated the study, but they didn't actually repeat the results of that study. And we know now that the dynamic exercises is the paramount type of movement that needs to occur. So moving on to that dynamic exercise. So dynamic constant external resistance, or DCER. So again, it involves the concentric as well as the eccentric contraction phases. And the eccentric is really important because that's where a lot of the muscular damage in the Z discs of the sarcomere are going to be occurring. And that's what's going to initiate that growth in the muscle. So the tension exerted by the muscles concentrically can actually vary through the range of motion depending upon the length of the fibers as well as the joint angle. And some of that's so some of that is biomechanically related as well as physiologically and structurally related within the muscles. But the external load is usually constant depending upon what types of exercises there are. There could be some ropes and chains and strength bands that could be utilized to give a different load throughout the range of motion, however. But if it is consistent throughout the entire range of motion, the weakest joint angle is actually going to be limiting the amount of weight that is lifted. And again, that's most of that is, at least some of that is biomechanically related as well as structurally related, depending upon the length of the muscle. Remember, a muscle fiber that is slightly stretched can actually exert a little bit more force than one that is fully contracted or one that is fully stretched out. Let's look at an example of this. So the bicep curl, the curls for girls is what the in crowd calls it. Anyway, so if we look at the barbell here, it is at approximately 100 degrees. And we have the diagram here showing different degrees of where the barbell is throughout the range of motion. In the full range of motion, going from about 60 degrees down to approximately 180 degrees. And you see these percentages right beside the angles. At 60 degrees, roughly 67% muscular strength capabilities. And at 180 degrees, there is approximately 71% muscular strength capabilities within this specific movement. Now, it's going to vary depending upon the muscle. It's going to vary depending upon the joint. But in this case, in the bicep curl, at approximately 100 degrees is where 100% of the muscular strength capabilities is occurring. So this is the strong point within this exercise. The weak point would be right here, right around 60 degrees. So just right before you get to the full range of motion in that case. Now, the reason this is happening right around 100 degrees is twofold. One, the muscle itself is slightly stretched, but also biomechanically related. If you look at the bicep itself and where it inserts, this position right here actually has an increase in the moment arm. So therefore, there's a little bit more torque when it's about at 100 degrees. So from a biomechanical standpoint, this is efficient, but also from a physiological standpoint and a structural standpoint of the muscle, this is the strong point of it. Now, as we decrease the joint angle or increase the joint angle, that moment arm is going to be decreased, thus decreasing the amount of torque. So from a biomechanical standpoint, that's the reason for it. The reason for it structurally is that the muscle up at the top is getting shorter. The muscle fibers are getting shorter, as well as getting longer down towards the bottom of the movement. So therefore, there's going to be less ability for muscular force production. All right, some different modes of resistance training. Oh man, there's a whole bunch of them here. Machines and free weights. We'll go over that one first. Machines have their pros and they also have their cons, as well as free weights. Machines are really good for people who are novice, somebody maybe who is a little bit older, somebody who has a disability, somebody has limited movement of certain joints. They're also a little bit safer. Not to say that they're completely safe, that there's absolutely no injuries that could ever occur from machines, but it can occur, but they're limited. Somebody, the chains or the cable could break, and somebody could also get their finger caught in pulleys and things like that, but it's fairly rare. Free weights, however, do come with some more cons in terms of injury risk, especially if something is lifted over the head. And if someone's not breathing properly, they could pass out. They could drop the weight on themselves. Even if it's not over their head, even if they just have, say, dumbbells, they could drop them on their toes or maybe somebody else's toes or drop them on somebody else. But the benefit of free weights is that the stabilizer muscles are hit just a little bit more because you need to control that weight throughout the entire range of motion. The machines give you a little bit of that, but not nearly as much as what the free weights do. We also have body weight exercises. So these are what they sound like. You're just using your body weight for certain exercises. So think of maybe something like a wall squat. And stability balls are also popular, medicine balls, and any type of elastic tubing. And we have examples here of medicine ball and the elastic tubing. And there's a whole plethora of exercises that can be performed with either one of these two pieces of equipment. And you can get different elasticities in some of these bands. Some are a little bit heavier than others, to where you're the further you stretch it out, the more and more weight that you need to exert on that elastic tubing. Medicine balls obviously also come in multiple weights and sizes as well. All right, table 13.2, just comparing some of the different resistance training modes. And when we look at probably one of the biggest limiting factors here is cost. When you look at weight machines, they can be super, super expensive, and their portability is very, very little, depending upon the piece of equipment. If it's something maybe like a Nautilus type of piece of equipment, or maybe a Bowflex, something like that, then that can be moved around a little bit more. But most machines, they're going to be brought in on dollies, and they're going to be set where they need to be, and they're not going to be moved all that often. But their ease of use, muscle isolation are very, very good. from a free weight standpoint, the cost is fairly low, depending upon what type of weights you get. And there's different companies that make maybe better weights, quote unquote, than others. But as long as there's some type of weight, it doesn't matter necessarily where it's coming from, what company. One of the more famous ones in terms of free weights would probably be the York Barbell Company. But there's a whole bunch of other ones as well. Now, the portability, it just kind of depends upon the equipment, and also the free weights, they're heavy, so you have to move them around a lot. It takes a lot of energy to move a whole stack of weights. Body weight exercises, obviously the cost there is nothing, really. And then the portability is, well, as long as you can get around, it's excellent. So there you go with that one. The ease of use, that can be variable depending upon the different exercises. Then any type of balls or cords or chains or strength bands, whatever it may be, some of that stuff can vary in terms of the cost, but most often it's going to be much, much less than weight machines and a little bit less than free weights. But the portability of those is fantastic. You can usually throw those in a gym bag usually. Okay, some safety concerns that we have. There's always going to be a risk for injury, no matter who it is, no matter how much training they've had previously, it doesn't matter. But most of them do tend to be preventable for the most part. Again, most of them are preventable. Probably most often people are injured because they're not using a machine properly. They're not using the weights properly. They're not using correct technique. They're being flat out say it, they're being a jerk. They're being an idiot in the weight room or the gym, wherever it may be. They could be inexperienced also. So proper supervision and teaching them how to actually use the machines and how to use the weight and where it needs to be stored also. And what are some of the ways to drop weight and also make space if you are performing an exercise that you might need to drop the weight, such as a power clean or something like that, or even like a butterfly curl. Where are you going to drop those dumbbells at? Care of the environment, just the surrounding environment. Again, going back to, where's that weight going to go? Who is around you? Being cautious of other people that are there. Equipment checks, making sure that everything's running properly. If something is starting to wear out, if maybe a piece of machinery needs greased, or needs a cable replaced, replacing that. Also using spotters and safety collars when necessary. Now, I will say this with the safety collars. This is a big safety component here. Using them, especially if there is a spotter there or if there's some way to drop the weight, definitely using safety collars. However, and this goes back to using spotters, if you don't happen to have a spotter, maybe you're lifting by yourself, or if somebody is lifting by themselves, it doesn't have to be you, but somebody is lifting by themselves. And I've done it before where I didn't have a spotter and I would not use the safety collars on something maybe like a bench press or something like that. On a squat, usually you can just drop the weight. However, on something like a bench press, I'm not going to drop the weight, because if I drop the weight, that's going to be a bad time. Not going to be having a good time with that. So I figured if I can't move the weight up, I'm going to start tipping it, and I'll pay for any damages in that gym that I need to, but I don't want my chest crushed. Now, obviously, the best thing would be to not perform that exercise, especially with heavier weight, unless somebody is there. But I was young and stupid once, so there you go. Yes, I used to be stupid. Well, still am, anyway. Sensible training loads and the proper technique is the next point there. And then also warming up for a little bit. Again, some type of dynamic warm-up, such as hops, jumps, and even something that mimics the exercises that you'll be performing at a very light weight. So any type of slow jogging or stationary bike, something to get the blood flowing, get the body warmed up, get the muscles warmed up as well. That's why it's called a warm-up, is to warm the body up. All right, some other training guidelines. So the choice of exercises, is it multi-joint versus single joint? Multi-joint tends to be the ones that they're going to elicit a lot of response, especially hormonal responses. Growth hormone is going to be increased greatly. Those tend to be the exercises that are performed first, like a bench press or a squat or a deadlift. Single joint exercises, those are ones that are isolating certain joints in certain muscles or muscle groups. So like a bicep curl, that's a single joint exercise. It's mostly for the biceps. All right, so we have this concept of closed kinetic chain versus the open kinetic chain. And the best way to describe it by giving you an example. So an example would be the squat. The squat, the foot is actually pressed against the floor, and you're raising the body up. That is known as a closed kinetic chain. Closed kinetic chains tend to have multi-joint exercises. The open kinetic chain is an exercise like the bicep curl, or maybe like on a curl machine or something like that, where it's really isolating a single joint muscle. So the closed kinetic chain do tend to be a little bit more beneficial, at least sometimes in some aspects, in that they are multi-joint. There's going to be more movement there. There's going to be maybe a little bit more of an increase in hormonal releases, especially the human growth hormone. Now, the open kinetic chain, they're still important. They're isolating certain muscle groups and certain joints to build those particular muscles. Overall, trying to promote balance, including the core, and the core is very, very important for maintaining balance, looking at the abs as well as the back, the obliques, the erector spinae, and also the functional performance of the body. So the order of the exercises, it kind of depends upon the goals of the training. Most often, though, large muscle groups are going to be performed before the smaller muscle groups, and then multi-joint before single joint. In fact, those do tend to be coexisting with one another. The multi-joint tend to be more the larger muscle groups. The single joint do tend to be the smaller muscle groups. Not always, but they do tend to be. And also the power exercises. So bench press, squat, deadlift, all that kind of stuff before kind of that strength, and especially targeting some of those muscle groups, those smaller muscle groups. All right, continuing on, some of the resistance that is used. So repetition maximum, 1 RM, or it could be a multiple repetition maximum, less than potentially 6 or less for strength, 15 to 20, or maybe a little bit more for endurance. It doesn't need to go too far, but maybe a little bit more than 20. 8 to 12 is proper for muscular strength, and also hypertrophy. That's kind of the Goldilocks zone for muscle hypertrophy. And also using a percentage of 1 repetition maximum, especially for beginners, maybe 60 to 70% 1 RM, and intermediate and advanced, bumping it up to 80%, or maybe even a little bit greater than 80% of 1 repetition maximum. Now, the total volume is calculated by taking the number of sets times the number of reps times the weight that was actually lifted for each one of those reps. So the ACSM recommends 2 to 4 sets for major muscle groups. 1 set maybe for beginners, but they do need to start going up in multiple sets eventually. And multiple sets for strength and power are very important as well. Rest intervals, this one is going to vary a little bit too, depending upon what the overall goal is. So this is going to influence, obviously, the energy recovery. The longer that individual is resting, the more energy they're going to get back. Essentially, they're going to get back and have more ATP for the next set. So 2 to 3 minutes for heavier loads for strength. For power, it may even go a little bit longer than that, maybe even 5, 6, 7 minutes potentially. For someone who's trying to train for endurance, maybe 1 to 2 minutes of rest for the lighter loads. But even some bodybuilders will get down to 30 seconds to a minute, potentially in between sets. And you could also start to even incorporate multiple exercises known as supersets. So you're basically going back and forth from one exercise to another. Sometimes this can be limiting depending upon where it is. If it's in a gym and there's a lot of people there, then it might be tough to get 2 pieces of equipment or 2 different stations, basically, and somebody not take it while you're on the other exercise. But they are still beneficial, though. Repetition velocity. So unintentionally slow or maybe intentionally slow. For beginners, want to control the movement. That's the main goal there, and get the proper form down. For somebody who's trained, accelerating that through the concentric phase, maybe slowing it down a little bit through the eccentric phase to help with the reaction to cause some of that damage, to cause some of the reaction for the muscle to grow. And the training frequency. So 2 to 3 days per week on non-consecutive days, not performing the same exercises day after day after day. That's going to start to break down the muscles because it's not allowing them to heal properly after those bouts of exercise. So right around 48 to 72 hours, so 2 to 3 days before or between the training sessions, especially with the same types of muscle groups or the same exercises. And higher frequency equals a greater specialization because of the weekly training volume needs to be a little bit higher for that. ACSM's resistance training guidelines for healthy adults. So multi-joint compound exercises, those dynamic movements again for exercises involving greater than one muscle group. Train each muscle group 2 to 4 sets approximately, anywhere from 8 to 12 repetitions. And then proper technique in controlling weights throughout the full range of movement. The full range of movement is a very important concept. Performing half sets or half range of motion or half or 3/4 range of motion is not going to do much good. There is still some gain in muscle strength and also muscle size with performing something like half squats or half of the range of motion, because you can lift heavier weight, because you're negating that that low point or that weak point in that range of motion. However, studies have shown that even if somebody is using lower weight in performing the exercise throughout the entire range of motion that it's intended to be moved through, they're going to gain more strength and also muscle mass than somebody is just performing the half range of motion. So work to the point of muscular fatigue, but not necessarily failure. The last couple repetitions of each set do need to be somewhat tough. There needs to be some struggle there, but not to the point where if it's a set of 8, the individual can only perform 4. If they can't go past that, then bumping the weight down is going to be more beneficial in the long run. So maintaining regular breathing pattern, breathing out on the concentric phase, breathing in on the eccentric phase. So trying to avoid the Valsalva maneuver. So training each muscle group 2 to 3 days per week, progressive overload, and periodically reassess and retest of the individual to make sure that they're progressing properly and seeing what is working and what is not working. And also seeking any type of qualified advice on technique and program design, just to make sure that things are on the up and up. They are actually performing the exercises properly, but also is there any tweaks that could be made to the program for additional increases in either strength or power or endurance. All right, systems of resistance training. So there's a single set, multi-set, and then we got a circuit training. So the single set, this is high intensity training. It may be 8 to 12 repetitions, taken to volitional fatigue, meaning basically between that 8 to 12 repetitions, there is going to be a fatigue in that range. So it's ideal for people maybe who are just starting off, who are not well conditioned. For multi-set exercises, maybe like 3 sets of 10 or whatever it may be, 10, 12, 15. So building up to a 10 RM, so light to a heavy pyramid type of build. And then this tends to be a little bit optimal for strength and power gains in this case. Now, an individual will gain a little bit more power if they are decreasing the amount of repetitions and increasing the weight, however. Circuit training, so about 60% of one repetition maximum. In this case, they're at about 10 to 15 repetitions per station, and you have different stations where the individual will be performing various exercises. So there's minimal rest in between, maybe up to 30 seconds between the exercises, but there's not a whole lot. There might be, I don't know, maybe even up to a minute, but most of the time it's bam, 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 going right around the circuit, and you just keep on going until you're done. Okay, resistance training in children. This one used to be seen as a bad thing, where children were not supposed to be weight training. This is an adult thing. But thank goodness we have moved past this type of thinking. We know from studies that it is still beneficial for children to be able to perform resistance training exercises. It's going to help them in the long run, generally speaking. So it does help with measurable health indexes. So the body composition tends to be better, helps with bone density, and then also metabolic risk factors, such as potentially insulin sensitivity and obesity. So looking at obesity and childhood obesity, potentially then turning into type 2 diabetes at a young age. So again, the insulin sensitivity is greater with each bout of exercise, or even just the initial bout of exercise, it is increased. And it helps to decrease the risk for that child to become obese as well. So just helping with body composition. And this is in males and females. Also helps stimulate bone modeling processes as they are growing as well. There's not much of an age limit, but they should be mature enough to at least follow some instructions. So 7 or 8 years of age. It could even maybe be a little bit younger, depending upon the person or the child. Now, they don't need to be performing, or at least they don't need to be performing. They can if they have proper supervision, they have proper technique. They don't need to be performing Olympic lifts or anything like that. But performing some exercises, maybe some bench press, and even some exercises on machines as well. So 8 to 15 repetitions is probably plenty. So a wide range of exercises, and making it fun for them too, figuring out what exercises and what pieces of equipment they like to use. That's going to be more beneficial because they're more likely to do that then. And if they have a variety of exercises that they're able to do, they're going to have more fun with it. And we all know that kids like to have fun, and so do I. And another group of individuals that it was once seen that these people should never weight train. But again, we know now that this is baloney. It's malarkey. And that is the seniors. So offset age-related loss in bone. And that's the bone and the muscle mass being decreased as we age. That's helping to negate some of that. Anyway, some of it's still going to happen. As we get older, Mother Nature takes its course, and things are going to happen to our bodies. We're going to start to break down, but we can help slow that down and negate it to where we still have good bone density, and we can keep at least some of our muscle mass, and therefore our strength is still there. And from that, we have a reduced risk for falls, any type of disabilities from those falls, or from any other injuries that could occur. So the reason we're losing that muscle mass as we age, we have what's known as sarcopenia. So there's a loss of type 1 fibers as well as type 2 fibers. So just overall muscle mass decreases as we age. So we also have the principle of reversibility. So we either use it or we are going to lose it. We're going to lose that muscle mass if we're not actually using it. And we're going to lose it pretty rapidly as soon as we start getting older and older and older. And we could also start to gain weight. And that weight would be in the form of the fat mass instead of the muscle mass or the fat-free mass. So greater than one set, maybe 10, 15 repetitions. So at least one set of 10 to 15 repetitions, maybe 8 or 10 exercises. For this population, machines or strength bands are really good. And then also beginning a light intensity, 40 to 50% one repetition maximum. It doesn't have to be really heavy weight. They don't need to be going to powerlifting competitions or anything. Of course, they could be, depending upon the individual. But at least 2 days a week is going to be plenty for them. Again, just to keep some of that muscle mass there and not lose as much, and having some weight-bearing exercises to help for bone health. So incorporating some balance exercises, maybe on stability balls, and also maybe a little bit of agility. Now, they might not be out there running cones and doing the shuttle run, and also proprioceptive training just to help with their ability to remain balanced, know where their joints are, know where their body parts are, so they can reduce the risk for falls. And the last population we'll look at is resistance training during pregnancy. So the recommendations put forth by the American College of Sports Medicine, 12 to 15 repetitions to moderate fatigue, proper breathing. Again, proper breathing, doesn't matter who it is, proper breathing is very, very key. exercising in a thermoneutral environment, so roughly 70 degrees ish, 60, maybe even 60 to 70 degrees, not too cold, and it definitely shouldn't be too hot. And they should obviously be drinking water ad libitum, meaning that as long as they are able to drink water and they're feeling thirsty, or they feel like they might be getting dehydrated, they definitely need to drink water in that case, and drink water on a regular basis. So stopping exercise with any type of discomfort or any type of complications that could arise during the workout. And resuming exercises maybe 4 to 6 weeks after the delivery of the baby, and maybe 8 to 10 weeks after a cesarean section. So avoiding any type of isometric muscle contractions that could induce potentially the Valsalva maneuver, especially after 16 weeks of pregnancy. And then any sports and activities with risks of falls. And obviously, it should be without stated, but anything that is like a contact type of sport or anything like that is probably a no-go, especially any point throughout the pregnancy. Okay, that was chapter number 13, Exercise Prescription for Muscular Fitness. If you have any questions, don't hesitate to ask, and I will be here. Man, what an exciting chapter. That was awesome. Yeah. Chapter number 13, Muscular Prescription. Muscular Prescription? What is what is muscular prescription? Anyway, so in this chapter, Exercise Prescription for Muscular Fitness, we went over some different terminology that we had maybe seen in the past, maybe you've seen in the past, and also talked about this semester. So some of it may have been a short review, but some of it might be new to you. And we also went over some of the different training aspects and maybe some things to watch out for, some recommendations from the American College of Sports Medicine, as well as some of the safety aspects. Then towards the end, we went over children, the seniors, as well as pregnant women, strength training as well. So in those three groups of populations, the female, the pregnant female, the senior, as well as the children, before, it wasn't too long ago, a few decades at least, that it was seen that they shouldn't be weight training. But we know that it's still beneficial for pretty much everybody. As long as you can do it properly, know how to go about it, and it is safe, then you should be good to go. And it is going to be beneficial no matter who you are. So that was chapter number 13. Not too much to say about it, but if you have any questions, drop me a line or something. Go ahead and let me know what you think. So thank you for watching. Hopefully I'm not blocking the camera too much. My jazz hands. Later.